16. Well, today we're looking at what it means to be a man in our day and age. So in the interest of fun, I want to start with my top 10 advantages to being a man. And in case you're wondering, is that being a little sexist? I'm going to do the same for women next week, so it'll all even out. Let's have a bit of fun. Number one advantage to being a man, people don't stare at our chests wherever we go. Number two, men know stuff about tanks. That's an advantage. Number three, if someone at a function is wearing the exact same outfit as us, we become best friends. Number four, grey hairs and wrinkles are a sign of wisdom and character for men. Number five, we can watch TV with a mate in silence without wondering if he's mad at me. Number six, we never have to experience the pain of childbirth. Number seven, no lines at the toilet for concerts and footy matches. That's an advantage. Number eight, our clothes have pockets on them. That's helpful. Number nine, when we leave the house, everything we need fits in our pockets. We don't need a bag. And number 10, we never have to hold on to it because, well, the world is our toilet. Top 10 reasons, advantages to being a man. Now, the reason I wanted to start with something silly is because our topic for today is actually quite serious. The reason being that young men today are having real trouble figuring out what it means to be a man. Now, if you are 45 years old or above, chances are you don't have this problem, right? It seems that Gen X and the boomers and the builders have been able to figure out what it means to be a man. But the current consensus is there is a crisis of manhood among Gen Y and Gen Z. A crisis of manhood. And look, there are many reasons for this, so I'll give you a couple. The general breakdown of community in the West, like we're very individualistic, what that means is men have fewer role models in their lives today. Second reason, as jobs have become a bit more academic and less physical, what that means is many women are now outshining men in traditionally male-dominated fields. A third reason is cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism seeks to take the power away from the powerful, and so they have been bad-mouthing the patriarchy for many, many years now. The transgender debate is making us question if there even is a thing called a man these days. Certain pockets of feminism have made it cool to badmouth men today. It's a cool thing to do, to denigrate men. Many TV shows, actually most TV shows and books, give us very poor examples of what men look like take Homer Simpson, for example. We've been bombarded with that. And add to this the many mixed messages about masculinity that we get from the media and online. And what this has left us with is two entire generations who aren't sure what it means to be a man anymore. Now, my hope for today is that we can speak into this crisis using some ancient wisdom, all right, some biblical wisdom on what it means to be a man. Now, this is a topical sermon. That means two things here at Earlwood Anglican. Number one, I'm not going to be systematically working through the passages that were just read for us, all right? They're sort of more of a springboard to get us thinking theologically. And number two, instead of a reflection time at the end, I'm going to open it up for questions, all right? So no reflection time today, just question time. And so if there's something I don't cover in the next 25 minutes or so, or something I don't explain well enough, you'll have a chance to ask me at the end. All right, so I've got 3 points. Excuse me. You can see that on the inside of your news sheet. 3 points as to what it means to be a man. We're going to start by looking at what I think is the main cause of the current crisis, which is that the many unhelpful voices and very confusing voices out there speaking to men today. So I've titled that, What Men Are Currently Hearing. We're then going to look at the Bible's wisdom on what a man should be like. So I've titled that, What Men Need to Hear. And then we'll wrap it up with our application, which is what men need to do. Now, if you are not a Gen Y or Gen Z man, this is not your cue to tune out, all right? The reason we have a crisis of manhood today is because society is sending men mixed messages. And so we want everyone to have a better understanding of what it means to be a man. Having said that, our main goal today is to show boys how to become men. There is nothing attractive or honourable about a man-child who sits in his mother's basement playing video games all day. This is actually why most cultures throughout human history have had initiation rites where boys, teenage boys, usually mid-teenage boys, would then become a man. Sadly, our culture seems to have postponed manhood until the late 20s, early 30s today. There's a lot of man-childs out there. So I pray you can all stick with me as we see what it means for boys to step up and start being a man. And I want to begin with looking at some of the voices that are bombarding men today. And this is sort of launching from our first passage. Proverbs chapter 1 is talking about where do we find wisdom from? Do not go down the path of foolishness. Don't listen to foolish people. Now, I cannot cover every voice out there in under 10 minutes. So what I want to do is I just want to look at the two extremes that are out there at the moment. And just so you know, this is not just me. I'm actually getting a lot of this from this book by Al Stewart. So Al Stewart is an Anglican minister here in Sydney. It's called The Manual, Getting Masculinity Right. It's a good book. Excuse me. And on the one extreme, we have what I think is best termed as a very anti-masculinity agenda. An anti-masculinity agenda. Now, just so you know, I personally think that feminism is a good thing, okay? When you advocate for the equality of women, that is a good thing. But today, there are certain pockets of feminism who think the only way to promote women is by dragging men down. And there are three main ways in which these certain pockets of feminism, it's not all feminism, but certain pockets of feminism are dragging men down today. And the first is when they talk about toxic masculinity so much that it leads many to believe all masculinity is toxic nowadays. Now, I'm not denying there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. That's actually the other extreme that I'm going to get to in a second. But when men are bombarded with all this talk of toxic masculinity, it's all about toxic masculinity, it can lead them to think that they're toxic just for being male. And that's very damaging. The second way men are dragged down is by bad-mouthing the patriarchy. Right? Now, the patriarchy, if you're not aware, this is the dictionary definition, a system of society or government where the eldest male, such as the father, is in charge. All right, so a matriarchy is when the eldest female is in charge. Now, it is true that men have traditionally held the majority of high-powered positions in government and in business. But instead of thinking of the patriarchy as men serving in difficult and high-stress situations for the good of society, all right, the patriarchy is now seen as an all-round negative thing. So I'll give an example. This is author and professor Robert Jensen. He says the patriarchy is a system that delivers material benefits to men but constrains all women. That's their definition of the patriarchy. And because a system that constrains all women is obviously bad, therefore the patriarchy is obviously bad. The third thing that drags men down is the idea that masculinity needs to be feminized. All right? If really masculine men are scary, then, well, feminine men are the ones that we want, according to this principle. So this is a journalist, Nikki Gemmell, she wrote an article called Beta Men Are Better, and she says this: feminine men, in my experience, are more confident and therefore more comfortable with their sexuality. Give me a man who is comfortable enough to wear nail polish. Give me a playful man who never entirely grows up and who is comfortable enough to farewell his mates with "love you" and call them darling. It feels tender and gorgeous and confident, unquote. Right? In the Barbie movie, the only man in the whole movie who was even remotely redeemable was the gender-neutral Alan. It's because very feminine or gender-neutral men are considered safer than masculine men nowadays. Now, if you're not online, you may not have heard some of these voices, but these are the voices that are bombarding men these days. They're very negative messages about masculinity, and they've left men feeling that they are what is wrong with society simply for being male. And what that does is it takes away the incentive for boys to become men. Right? Why would you want to become the very thing that society says is to blame for most of society's problems? But there's a second problem with this messaging, okay? People don't like being told they're the problem simply for being born that way. At some point, people will push back. And this has led to the other extreme of messaging among young men today, what they're being fed. There is a growing number of online influencers who are reacting to the feminisation of young men by calling men to become ultra-masculine. Now, the way you become ultra-masculine, this is a very reactionary kind of narrative, but they say you need to bulk up at the gym, very important. You need to go make millions of dollars. Don't just make a good wage, make millions of dollars, and you need to treat women as sex objects. That's the messaging that's coming through. Now, the biggest voice among these influencers is a guy by the name of Andrew Tate. If you are over the age of 40, you may not have heard of this guy. But almost all boys between the ages of 10 and 30 know of Andrew Tate. He has millions of followers, mostly young men. Now, I watched an interview. I needed to know what was going on in the culture today. I watched an interview with him and a guy called Patrick Bet-David. Patrick Bet-David is actually very good generally, but he went over and interviewed Andrew Tate, and at the end of the interview, he asked Tate, what advice would you give young men? And Andrew Tate said, the advice I would give young men is go and sleep with 12 women and learn about women before you find the right one to marry. That's one of his pieces of advice. He was at it again last month. I think it was on Twitter. He said that men should be fathering dozens of children with multiple women. That's his idea of manhood. Now, I pray most men are smart enough to realise that Tate and the like are completely stripping women of their humanity by reducing them down to either a baby factory or an object for men's sexual or educational gratification. It is evil, the kind of things that they are telling men today. Right? That is toxic masculinity. Yet these are the very unhelpful voices that are bombarding young men today. Is it any wonder that Gen Y and Gen Z are having a tough time figuring out what it means to be a man? Right, so that's how not to be a man. Right? Proverbs 1 says, be very careful who you throw your lot in with. Be very careful where you look for wisdom. That's where not to look for wisdom. They're unhelpful voices. So what should masculinity look like? Well, look, again, we can't cover everything in under 10 minutes. So let me give you what I think are the Bible's top 3 lessons on what separates men from boys. Okay? So if you're a male who is 18 years or older or about to become 18 years or older, and you don't want to be a shameful man-child whose mummy is still tucking you into your Star Wars sheets at night, all right, here are the top 3 things you need. Number 1, step up and take responsibility for your life. All right? God put Adam in the garden not to sit around and have his mummy take care of him, even though he didn't have a mummy. All right? God put Adam in the garden to work it, to take care of it, and to put food on the table. Right? We need to understand Adam's punishment in Genesis 3 was not hard work. He had hard work in the garden before the fall. The punishment in Genesis 3 was to turn that work into painful toil. Right? But our job as men from the very beginning of time is to work hard and to take care of ourselves and our family. Now, that's going to look different in different cultures. So if you live in an agrarian society, like a subsistence society, that means learning how to be a good farmer so that you can grow your own food. But in our Western culture, it's a bit different. Right? What do we need to step up as men in the West? Well, number 1, you need a good education. Right? Sorry, kids, but you need a good education even to survive, let alone thrive in our society today. Work hard at school. Number 2, it means getting yourself qualified in a particular field. Now, I don't care if it's uni or TAFE or on-the-job training, but get yourself qualified, trained up in something useful. And just so you know, gender studies is not that useful. Do something useful for society. And number 3, get a job. Pay your way in life. And the sooner you do that, the better. When I was 20, I moved out of home for 6 months just to go to Melbourne as part of my engineering degree. And when I was down there, I had major car troubles. My car was falling apart. And so I asked Mum to help me out. And she said, "Sorry, honey, you're on your own with this one." Best thing she could have done, because it taught me responsibility. I had to look after myself, all right? And that's number 1 to being a man. Step up and start looking after yourself. Number 2, learn some self-control. In Titus chapter 2, Paul gives a bunch of commands, a bunch of instructions to men and women. So he talks to older men, older women, younger men. To older men, he says, be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, there's our word, sound in faith, in love and endurance. Older women, be reverent, not slanderous, not addicted to much wine, but teach what is good. Younger women, love your husbands and your children, be self-controlled, there it is again, pure, busy at home, kind and subject to your husbands. Younger men, be self-controlled. That's it. I've got one job for you, young men. Be self-controlled. And this is one of the biggest issues among young men today, a lack of self-control. They lack self-control when it comes to alcohol. They lack self-control when it comes to high-risk behaviour. They lack self-control when it comes to porn. They lack self-control when it comes to how many hours they spend gaming or watching YouTube. And they lack self-control when it comes to the opposite sex. All right? Women are not objects to be used for your sexual gratification. They are image bearers of God, who are to be treated with gentleness and respect. All right? Show self-control when it comes to sex. So that's the second thing. The third thing men need to hear today is to sacrificially love and care for those around you. Now, male headship is a little on the nose in our society today, mostly because too many husbands are not manning up when it comes to this aspect of being a man. Now, let me tell you, it is very hard submitting to a man who uses his position of power to love and care for himself. But it is super easy to submit to a real man. Let me tell you what a real man does. This is from Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, if you want to look it up later on. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. All right? Jesus is the perfect man, and he sacrificed everything for his people. Now, if you think that Jesus' sacrifice is only about his physical death, then you haven't been coming to this church long enough. All right? Jesus' physical death is just the tip of the iceberg that happened on that very first Good Friday. The cross is God the Father forsaking God the Son for the very first time in all of eternity. It is the breaking of a perfectly loving and completely fulfilling relationship. And you and I, with our feeble human minds, we cannot even begin to fathom the sacrifice that would have taken. And that's what real men are called to do, to sacrificially love and care for those around you. That's the number one message of this book. Sacrificially love and care for those around you, particularly those under your headship. Now, that means taking a bullet or swimming between your wife and a shark, absolutely, but it also means giving yourself up in the little daily things as well. Right? Real men sacrifice themselves for others in everything. So, that's what God wants men to hear about being men. Now, that's not all the Bible says on this subject, all right? Like I said, we can't cover everything. God wants godly men. He wants men who honour their parents, who love and train their kids, who are good mates, etc., etc. There's other things involved in it as well. Please don't think that being a man can be reduced down to just three things, but they are the top, what I think are the top three things that men need to hear today. But the final question we need to ask is, how is it that men can do this, right? What practical things can men do to take responsibility, to be self-controlled, and to sacrifice for those around them? Well, I want to give you 4 practical steps that men can take to be a man as we close, all right? Number 1, excuse me, get off video games. We now, as a species, spend on average 7 hours a day looking at screens. Now, that's outside of work. We do our 8 hours of work, and then we spend 7 hours a day looking at screens. 3.5 hours is watching TV or movies. All right? An hour and a half is on social media. An hour is just generally surfing the net, and a half hour chatting to friends online. We spend an hour and a half every day playing video games as a species, whether that be Fortnite or Clash Royale on your phone. Now, the problem with gaming is this. It is a proxy for real life. It is a substitution for real life. It is a substitution for getting out there and actually responsibly looking after yourself. All right? Think of it this way. What is the point of a video game? It's always to get to the next level, and the next level, and then the level after that, and the level after that. And too many men today are spending all their time chasing the next level in a fake world rather than chasing the next level in a real career. They have substituted real life for this fake world, right? Being an epic gamer is not a sign of real manhood. It is more likely a sign that you are too weak or too afraid to take responsibility in the real world. Get off video games, or at least limit yourself. Step 2, get off porn. Never has it been easier for men to dive into sexual immorality as it is today. Now, the reason the Bible is so anti-sexual immorality, all right, we saw that in our second passage today. That's what it's all about, Proverbs chapter 7. The reason is because pornography or sex, like cheap sex, is a proxy. It's a substitute for real relationships with real people. Right? Just like the adulterous woman in Proverbs 7, pornography entices people, usually men, with cheap sex. Now, what do I mean by cheap sex? I mean the dopamine hit without the work. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, I've put a link on your sermon outline about this. He tells us that the human brain is not designed to be exposed to sexual image after sexual image after sexual image. All right? The human brain is designed to work for its reward. Now, dopamine and serotonin are chemicals that are released in the brain to make us feel good. They are the body's natural reward system, and there are 2 of the things that are released during sex, all right? Now, the problem with hookup culture and the problem with prostitution and the problem with pornography in particular is it takes the work out of getting pleasure. Now, getting immediate dopamine hits may sound like fun. I get the pleasure without the work. But what it actually does is it rewires our brain to require more and more stimuli just to feel good. Right? This is one of the side effects, the many side effects of pornography, is it ends up lowering people's ability not just to enjoy sex, but to enjoy life itself. Because you've rewired your brain. That dopamine hit doesn't do what it's supposed to do anymore. And you need more and more and more. All right? Step 2, show some self-control and get off porn because it is ruining you. Number 3 thing that men have to do, treat women with gentleness and respect. 1 Peter 3:7 if you want to look it up later on. All right? Now, I don't need to tell you that the minute a man raises a hand against a woman, he ceases being a man. That is not what men do. But men are also to treat women with gentleness verbally. Right? Do not yell at or berate women. We're also to treat women with respect sexually. Right? Sex before marriage is always objectification. See, whether we whether we use sex to get love, and that's generally a female thing to do, or whether we use love to get sex, and that's generally a male thing to do, you're not actually committing yourself to that person. You're just looking for something that you want, and you're using that other person as an object to get that. Right? If you want to show love, then commit yourself to the woman before sex. Right? But husbands are also to treat women with respect in the marriage bed. Your wife is not a porn star who is there for your gratification. Treat women with gentleness and respect. Number 4, and this is, again, probably the biggest message from this book. Might sound weird, but let me explain. Number 4 is, be at church every week. Be at church every week. See, if you want to be a good man, then you need to surround yourself with good role models. Why is that? It's because manhood has always been more caught than taught. We need good role models in our lives. And church is one of the last bastions of community left in Western society. Like, where else do you get community? Maybe a sports club, maybe the local RSL, but that's about it. But here's the thing. We as men need to step up and be good role models to others as well. Right? Church is not about what you get out of it. It's about what you put in. And so even if you're 16 or 17, please understand that there are young boys in this church that look up to you. Right? So we need communities where men are able to see what it means to be a real man. So this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say today, is be at church every week so that you can be surrounded by role models and be a role model of what a real man looks like. And here's the thing, if you can do these things, then you're on track as a man. Right? You don't need to be perfect. There's only one guy who ever got manhood perfect. But if we are putting our big boy pants on and taking responsibility for our life, if we are showing the strength to have self-control in the various areas of our life, and if we are stepping up to sacrificially love and care for those around us rather than just impetually demanding others serve us, then you're being a man. Right? Now, some of those things that we heard before, like getting in touch with your feelings, that's not a bad thing. Getting fit and in shape, that's not a bad thing. Making large amounts of money, that's not sinful unless you have idolized it. But they are not what it means to be a man. They are so far down the list, I can't even tell you if it's number 20 or number 50. All right? Being a real man means responsibility, self-control, and sacrificial service. May that be the kind of men that fill our halls every Sunday. Men who are following the example of the real perfect man, Jesus Christ. Oh, David. All right, go for it. Yeah, okay, so Dave's question is, if we're spending 7.5 hours or about 7 hours a day on screens, and I've said, like, get off some of those screens, what do we do with the rest of the time? How do we fill that in? Good question. There are various things. So look, you need to understand, like what I was saying is video games is a substitute for real life, and porn is a substitute for real relationships. Fill them with some of those things. So get out there and do something that is relational, so you can relate to people, and get out there and do things that are going to be beneficial in other ways. So look, reading, playing sport, hanging out with friends. One of the fascinating things, so this is to do with any addiction. So one of the things that Alcoholics Anonymous realised decades ago is the opposite of alcoholism is not sobriety. right? The opposite of alcoholism is community. The way you get off your addiction, whether it be to alcohol or gambling or cigarettes or porn or gaming, is to actually spend time with real people. And that's one of the things that's really hurting Western society is we've become so individualistic, we don't have those communities anymore. But that would be one of the things I would say, get out there and get into the community or do some other things, sport, volunteer work, be at church. They would be some of the things. Good question. Anyone else? Sharon, you're more than welcome to, but you use your big voice. Say again, sorry? Did I mention anything about gay men? Is that your question? Gaming. I didn't mention about gaming. Gay men, right. Okay. I did not mention homosexuality today. Correct. Yeah. It did not come up in the topic as I was doing it. But the Bible is clear. It says that practicing homosexuality is a sin and is to be avoided. Peter, now we've got the ball rolling. Go. Yep. Yep. Yeah, thanks, Peter. So it's not really a question, but I'll just repeat it for the camera. Peter is just advocating for the importance of role models. And like I said, manhood is more caught than taught. Young boys will always be looking at men to see what it means to be a man. And if they have a lack of role models in their life, they will find it elsewhere. And sadly, online, they are bombarded by really bad examples. I will give you what I think is a good example in place of people like Andrew Tate. I've generally found what Jordan Peterson has to say is usually helpful. He's not a Christian, but most of what he comes up with is quite in line with what the Bible teaches us. So he is a good example if you can find Christian people online, but also just get to church and bring your young men to church. Bring your boys to church and have them surrounded by good role models. Yeah. Was there another one down here? Spiro. Good question. So Spiro's asking, is the general negative comments about men these days, is it related to a hatred of God? I don't know if I would draw a straight line to that, but I would say that might be part of it. I think generally what is that, like I said at the beginning, there's no single reason why manhood has been bad-mouthed in recent years. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons, like I said in the intro, but we might want to add that to the list. Yeah, but I think there's various reasons why we've got to where we are today, and our job is to try and crawl our way back. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Myrna. Yeah, thank you. Myrna is just saying it's great to have good male role models in your sons' lives. Yeah, indeed. Yes. Excellent question. Excellent question. So Barbara's asked about single sex versus co-ed schools. I personally, this is my personal opinion, I would rather my kids went to a co-ed school for that very reason, so that they know how to relate to the opposite sex in an appropriate way. And I think this is just one of the things I've seen. So I think there are advantages to single-sex schools. I'm not going to badmouth them. There are advantages to women, to girls going to girls' schools and boys going to boys' schools. I think the advantage of the co-ed, this is my personal opinion, is that it outweighs the advantages of the single-sex schools, in that it allows them to learn how to treat the opposite sex in an appropriate way. I think there is sometimes some toxic masculinity and some toxic femininity that can come out in those single-sex schools. It does not always happen. I'm not here to badmouth it. That's just my own personal opinion, and I think it's important that we learn how to interact with people of the opposite sex. Yeah, but that's a personal Brendan opinion. We have time for maybe one more. Yes, all the way up the back, Joe. Yeah. Yeah, and I agree, Joe. Like even me growing up, we had access to pornography if we went out looking for it. Now you just pick up your phone. That is horrible. The social media bombarding their brains with all these crazy ideas is really difficult, and it's very difficult to raise boys today. What they need is good role models, all right? Like I said, the most important thing, get to church every week. Get your boys as part of a community where they'll have good male role models, and in particular with fathering, as Joe just said there. All right, that's it for now. We're going to stand and sing again, and we're going to sing about, the perfect man who gave everything for us. I stand amazed.